Today, we are meeting for the second guest speaker episode of the entire season on education reform, which is deeply rooted in ed reform. And today we have Selena Hadamio with us, and I met this beautiful and brilliant and grounding individual through my own yoga certification journey, and we crossed paths there. And I am deeply, deeply honored to bring on this individual and have her elevate her perspective and ideas regarding education reform. So, Selena, please share about yourself and your background with education with all who are listening now.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That was so beautiful. Yeah, first, thank you for inviting me into this space. I guess a little bit about me. So I'm originally from Kenosha, Wisconsin, and I went to school to become a teacher, and from there, well, I guess my certifications, I went for elementary education, got my ESL license, and then I started teaching back home in my home community, ESL. So I was teaching primarily newcomer students to the country and supporting them. And then I felt like I needed some representation for teachers of color, somebody that looked like me, to grow as an educator. So I decided, let me move to California. I'd never been to California before, but I just had this idea that that was, the place to be, where maybe I could feel more validated, could learn more, be in community. So I left, went to California, and I taught at a middle school there for 2 years, and we can get a little bit more into it later on, but definitely was a bit difficult and challenging. And then I found my way to yoga to kind of help myself through those challenging moments. Went back, got my master's in secondary education. So then I got my certification in English, language arts, social studies, reading intervention, another ESL certification. And then I moved back to Wisconsin, and taught at my high school that I graduated from for 3 years teaching ethnic studies. And that actually has shifted so much of my perspective. Teaching specifically ethnic studies, I think brought a lot of healing to me as an educator, but to my students. And so now I am actually back in California. So I left, came back, and now I'm kind of in this in between space of, what is the path forward. But really, I think my vision is along the lines of a PhD in ethnic studies and healing. So there's a lot. Definitely, we can get into that with education. That yeah, I'm open to sharing.
So, so wholeheartedly grateful to have you here with us today. And I'm wondering, how has the act of forward movement transformed your life up till this moment?
Um, I guess, I think what's been really beautiful is so the first time I left teaching, which was about maybe 4 years into my teaching career, um, I came to this place, this roadblock of being unsure, of not knowing what was the path forward, if there was a path forward. And I think at that point, I was I was ready to give up and just be like, no, education, I guess this is not for me. But when I was saying goodbye to my students, I remember that last day so vividly. Um, them running to me, crying, hugging me, and I was like, no, I'm here for a reason. I'm here for a purpose. I love my students. So I needed to find my path forward. And so I think that's been the drive for me is it's always those connections, those relationships with my students, and my community that has really held me in the most challenging moments and in that darkness, whenever I've fallen. So I am so grateful for my students, for young people, honestly, because they truly, truly deserve more. And I wish we could see all the gifts that they bring to humanity. So I'm just grateful for them for pushing me forward.
What a powerful reminder that in the process of moving forward, it doesn't necessarily have to be an internal strength that drives that and has that
Mhm.
momentum. We can reach out and allow those around us to support, regardless of the age, regardless of
Mhm.
who they are, where they have come from. It's more of that soul to soul knowing of there's a being with love and they are encouraging me and
Mhm.
inspiring me to move forward. Now,
Mhm.
Selena, where I'm wondering in the journey of these children bringing forward their own wisdom and gifts, what is alive right now that you've experienced within the educational structure that is fostering the ability for youth to bring that aspect of themselves forward?
Um, I think, I mean, I feel like I've been in so many different spaces. And what I guess I've seen the most is for them to just be authentic, to be themselves, to find those spaces within the school that they can, yeah, truly, truly be who they are. And I think sometimes it's rare. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but I think sometimes it's rare for them to find those spaces. And so often, what we see is we see students that are disengaged, or we see students that are tired. They don't want to be at school. And I really think a lot of it actually is because the space isn't affirming them. It's not affirming their experience. It's not validating their experience. But when you create a classroom, you build this community with students that's deeply rooted in relationship and connection, and identity, right? And they really feel seen. Then that's when they come alive. And obviously, I've been able to really truly embody that work with my teaching and ethnic studies. And so I really want to understand that more and research that more, and expand ethnic studies because I truly believe in it so deeply as a pathway to healing.
Mm. And while honoring maybe the aspect of the reality of where educators are now across the country throughout all states, and how ethnic studies is not a central focus for each educator individually. And what have you explored in your own practices that are maybe potentially relatable and also possible for an educator to bring forward in their classroom that is easily obtainable
Mhm.
or opening up for them to
Mhm.
support that classroom environment that you speak
Mhm.
of?
I mean, honestly, I think it's about tapping into yourself because I think so when I first began my teaching journey, um, I was so disconnected from myself and my identity. I am biracial, and that has been a struggle for me my whole life is navigating like who am I? Do I belong to this community? Do I belong to this community? And I never felt like I truly fit in anywhere in any space. And in Nahuatl, the Mexica language, there's a word called Nepantla. And Nepantla means the space in between. And so I've kind of allowed myself to really sit in that space. And it's just given me, it's kind of like mirror work, right? Like looking back at me, who I am. And so I guess for educators, honestly, it's recognizing the humanity that we have in us. And I think especially not just, in education, but all of our systems um, are very oppressive, right? They're very traumatizing, very harmful to our bodies, to our minds, to our spirits. And so allowing ourselves to just be and affirm ourselves, I guess. And so I think what I've realized, I went back, got my yoga certification. Um, really focusing on social emotional learning. Um, but I think a lot of adults are forgetting about their emotions that they also carry a lot. So taking the time to sit with that, to heal, and then once you're in that place of, not fully healed, but at least having the recognition that I'm a human, I have needs as well. Then you can show up for your students. And I guess what I've found to be the most crucial in creating those communities with for my students and for myself, right? Is just the authenticity, being real and showing up and saying, "Hey, I'm struggling today. I'm not doing well today." And I'm if I guess with students, they see right through you, right? They see right through adults. And so I think being as authentic and honest with them really builds that trust, builds that safety, and that's how we can cultivate. I don't think it needs to be this cookie cutter curriculum because social emotional learning, we can get into that even more. Because I have my thoughts and feelings about social emotional learning, because there's a way to do it humanizing. There's also a way to not to do it a little bit that's dehumanizing, that I feel like I see a lot in our schools right now. But I think we don't need the cookie cutter curriculums for how to be humans. And I think that's what sometimes social emotional learning is packaging and selling to these schools and to these teachers, where it's like, no, just show up as your authentic self, and your students will love you for who you are. And I think that has brought me so much healing, is just showing up, being true to myself, being authentic, um, and seeing that, yeah, they love me for who I am, and vice versa. I love them for who they are, and so that has just created just really strong community. And obviously with the academics, right? When you have a space that's very rooted in community, in humanity, where there's that deep sense of belonging, your students are going to take risks, right? Even if they don't feel like they know the answer, what you're looking for, they're going to try. And that's what I've seen. My students have gone above and beyond, to grow, right? To grow as people, because I'm also doing the same. I'm embodying that, and I'm showing them that I'm growing, that I'm going back to school, that I'm learning yoga, that I'm, constantly wanting to learn too. Reading, I'm always reading. And so showing that to them, that, learning is it's a lifelong process. And so healing, is a lifelong process, and it's beautiful to do it in community.
Mhm. I am receiving this and relating so, so deeply, regardless of the age, too, as you're
Mhm.
speaking. I think of all of the places I've been personally throughout the childhood development journey and how, yes, whenever I'm having an off day or whenever I react in a way that does not feel good, I
Mhm. Mhm.
immediately acknowledge it with the group.
Mhm.
And or also prior to me reacting in a way that is not based in like a central calm nervous system, I then acknowledge that and share because it's that human to human. We're not, teacher the best to child still learning. It's I'm a human, you're a
Mhm.
human, we're doing this together, we're all growing. And also, I would love, love, love to hear your thoughts around SEL and
Mhm.
elevate to anybody tuning into this conversation, maybe some things that they really relate with, or maybe it's going to be eye-opening for them to be like, oh man, I do that because that's what the school tells me to do, and potentially shift some perspectives along the way. I'd love to hear.
Yeah. So it's I think the work kind of started with our yoga program, right? Is understanding social emotional learning, tapping back into ourselves. And when I went, this was during COVID when I was in my master's program. My capstone was actually all focused on social emotional learning. And it was in the midst of COVID. So I really wanted to see, how schools were embedding social emotional learning, because I think right when COVID was happening, that's when SEL became this huge buzzword, right? And so I researched it to try to understand where did it come from? How are different schools, teachers facilitating social emotional learning practices? And then what is the impact? And I don't know if you've ever heard this term, Dina, I can't remember her last name, but she has a TED Talk and she talks about social emotional learning. And there's this phrase called social emotional learning is white supremacy with a hug. Have you ever heard that?
No. Mm-mm.
Um, and so, like, oftentimes, so I studied Dr. Bettina Love's work, and her work is a lot around social emotional learning. It's about dreaming, right? Specifically for Black children and dreaming, and how schools basically, it's just, it stops, right? The dreaming goes away. And so, what ends up happening with the social emotional learning is it's embedded or character education is implemented. So character education is like we're going to teach our students how to be respectful. We're going to teach our students how to just have these values, right? These very specific values, and we can think, yeah, well, of course, I want my students to be respectful. I want them to be kind. Um, but oftentimes the intention with enforcing or implementing that character education um, is this idea or deficit perspective that our students don't already come with those values, that their families aren't teaching them those values. So, as a school, as the system, we have to teach them because nobody at home is going to teach them to be kind and respectful. And so I often think that's where SEL can be very dehumanizing, right? Because families we're viewing them from a deficit perspective when families actually they want their child to be successful, right? Maybe they don't engage in the ways that schools want or expect, or hope, but they are doing their best. Our families are doing their best, and and so I think we have to be very careful about how we roll out the social emotional learning, um, you know, the cookie cutter curriculums, and really start with where our students are at and allow them to step up and to see their strengths, right? Because our students already come with all of these strengths, and maybe they've been beaten down, right? They've gotten their dreams crushed because of the system, because of living in under-resourced communities. So social emotional learning, and I've seen as well PBIS, so positive behavior enforcement, right? Or intervention system um, is can also be a way that's dehumanizing because it's like, okay, we'll give you this if you comply. So what I'm seeing with social emotional learning sometimes is infused with the PBIS, which has good intentions, right? But sometimes under that layer is it's about compliance. It's about having our students, yeah, be obedient. And we don't want we want our students to listen, but not at the expense of their humanity. And so that's where I tend to push back with social emotional learning. I'm all for it, 100%. I'm for social emotional learning, but it has to be in a very humanizing way, using a very restorative model, really allowing students to be themselves and show up themselves. It's okay to have emotions, right? It's okay to be angry. You have every right to be angry. Our communities are under resourced. We should be angry, right? And so I think oftentimes, yes, the anger maybe comes out in different ways in schools that um, administration is, teachers don't know how to handle, and that's fair, right? We're tired, we are tired, and so it's about recognizing where is that anger coming from, what is the root of that, and so not to punish those kids, um, for having anger, for having feelings, right? Having emotions about their realities. It's about having spaces where they can express it. So for me, that's what social emotional learning is. It's, going back to your other question of, what can teachers do is, okay, you notice that all your students or a few students are acting out. Why? Can we stop instruction and take those moments and just be together, right? Maybe those students, we just need just sit in a circle. I loved community circles. We would just sit and talk. What's going on for you? What's coming up for you? How can we support each other? I'm noticing that we're yelling at each other right now. And I know that's not what you mean to do, right? It's just you're responding to something deeper. So how can we express in a way that we feel okay? We're not harming anybody else. We're not harming ourselves. So to me, that's where, SEL can be very, very humanizing. Um, but it's tough, right? Because I think a lot of adults too, we're tired, right? Educators are tired. And so it's a lot. I think it's a lot for teachers ask them to carry the weight of the world, to carry our our communities are suffering. So we're feeling that. Our students are feeling it, right? Um, it's a lot, but yeah, and I don't know what the answer is. Like I don't know what the answer is, but I think step one is just awareness, recognizing what's happening in our communities and how can we provide spaces for our students to dream, to be, to exist, to be human, yeah.
Mm. And may this season and may this conversation be just that of a starting point of momentum forward, of there isn't one answer. At least that's my belief in this moment in time. And that's
Mhm.
why I'm so stoked about the season, Selena, is because we're pulling different perspectives from different individuals throughout different career paths and who have
Mhm.
a root in the development of youth and reforming the educational structure. So much of what you just spoke about elevated quite a bit. One being looking at systems overall, as you said, are very oppressive in
Mhm.
nature within the States specifically is what we're speaking about for this season.
Mhm.
And when we pull out the educational structure, of course, that is oppressive as well. And something I'm wondering is how how educators are even able to begin what you are speaking of if they're not looking at their own white supremacy behaviors within, and if they're not looking at the ways in which they oppress and pushing it aside. How can you even have that conversation with youth or look
Mhm.
at it if you're not looking inwards? That's
Mhm.
one thing that's coming up. And then the other
Mhm.
thing is that this really powerful idea I've been playing with recently, and it's regarding SEL. And I, for
Mhm.
one, am an educator who never really focuses on academics. It's not my individual strength. Therefore, I don't feel like it should be coming from me. Sure, I could study more, but I don't feel like God placed me on this path for that journey. So I'm more
Mhm.
focused on the somatic experience and tuning
Mhm.
inward and what is the body
Mhm.
speaking to you about, and remembering your own inner intelligence within. And when looking at an educational structure and system, I'm playing with the idea of what if it's not about bringing in SEL? What if the reform has nothing to do with bringing in a cookie cutter curriculum or even bringing in practices within the structure? What if the reform is more of let's begin by having that as the root foundation for all individuals across the board and build on top of that? From what I just spoke about, I'm wondering what's coming forward for you and if there's anything that's alive that you're looking to share right now.
Yeah. I think, you know, the idea of, we're constantly bringing in outside, outside, outside. And I thought a lot about that with professional development. So, as you said, if we have educators, how can educators show up for their students and anti-oppressive ways when they're not looking inward. And so I think oftentimes what happens in schools is administrators, the district will hire outside experts, right? Outside experts to come in and teach about white supremacy. They'll come in and teach about culturally relevant practices. I've always, being usually one of two, three teachers of color in the space, usually we look at each other like, okay, why, you're paying, how much money for somebody. So we're in Wisconsin, right? You're paying how much money for somebody to fly in from New York to come speak and to share. And while that is valuable, right? It has its place for sure. So I don't want to minimize anybody who that is, what they do. But oftentimes those are people that are not from our communities and they come in and share their experience, which is valid and fair. But again, they're not from the community. And so what I've always, wondered was, why are we not just inviting people in our own space who have the lived experience of being in the community to provide professional development, right? Because one, you could give more funding, you could pay those people more, right? Because they have that experience, you're saving money. And just, that's what I've always, just wondered. I was just super curious about it. And so um, that's what I would love to see, is having people in the space already be the ones leading, or even just generally in the community. Maybe they're not in the school, but they're in the community. A leader at the Boys and Girls Club down the street, right? They're working with our kids every day. So invite them in. What are you seeing? What can we learn from you? How can we partner? So I think a lot of it comes down to having community. And I do know there are schools around the country that do have that, right? Unfortunately, I was never, I don't think ever part of any school that did have that, but I have seen colleagues and friends who have been, and so that has been really beautiful to see. So that, yes, and as you said, yeah, like the social emotional learning piece, not getting these purchasing, right? Again, these expensive curriculums, these cookie cutter curriculums where um, I think what I've seen is those, just packaged curriculum of SEL. And sometimes it causes even more harm to the students, right? Because there's questions on there that are not culturally sensitive, that are not culturally sustaining. Or, right, it was just after COVID, we would have to ask questions about death and dying. And I'm like, I'm not comfortable talking about that right now because my student just lost his mom, so it's really about having space for reflection, having space to go inward, and again, to bring out our own humanity with our students. But as you said too, with our systems are already very oppressive as well. So it can be very hard for us to find the time to reflect. And that's in any workspace, right? It can be really hard to find the time to just take care of ourselves, to be our best, to again, and to show up as our best with our students.
And in that journey of if adults aren't able to find the time, then how are youth going to be able to find the time? Because
Mm-hmm.
maybe the adults are an example for the youth. So whatever the youth are
Mm-hmm.
witnessing from the adults, that's what they're
Mm-hmm.
going to mimic. And I said
Mm-hmm.
to my mom the other day or yesterday, I was like, there's this one child in my class, and they're always staring at me, like completely in their 2.9 to 6, completely curious and always coming up and giving me hugs. But it was a
Oh.
really powerful reminder yesterday of like, I am always being watched,
Mm-hmm.
always. From the way that I'm speaking to my colleagues, from the way that I'm honoring the materials in the classroom, from the way that I'm interacting with one another. And if I was not rooted in my own body and safe in this home of my vessel, then what potential damage would I be doing
Mm-hmm.
without even knowing that I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
it? And that's a big responsibility. And I
Mhm.
wonder how many educators out there right now are just not okay with saying yes to that responsibility. And I wonder how many educators right now are not okay with saying yes to letting go of the control of being in the position that they're in to open up space for something potentially new to take its form. And as you mentioned before, there is no answer for this. It's more of maybe lean into the contemplations of what is possible, and may that shift and mold and stretch and play with our own perception of ourself, therefore our own perception of what we're seeing within the systems. Now, Selena, what is something that you feel is really tangible when it comes to having a micro shift that could potentially be a macro shift within the structure
Mm.
of education?
Um, I mean, to be completely transparent, I am currently not in the role of a teacher. I'm actually at a university and I'm still supporting high school students. Um, but it's been, I think, tough for me, um, because, Audre Lorde's quote of you can't, oh, what is it? You can't dismantle the house, that the master created with the master's tools. Um, and so I've had to step out of that space because even the grading system, right? There's there was so much, there is a lot that we can do as educators, day by day, right? Moment by moment of just taking pauses. Obviously we have the yoga, the mindfulness practices, just taking a moment to breathe. Sometimes what I would do is just give them like 2 minute break. All right, get up, walk around the room. When the timer goes off, all right, let's get back to work. So something just, like that. Um, but I guess where I've struggled is even though I would try to embed all these little tangible things, it still felt like I was still causing harm, right? Because I was seeing just I was complying. I was complicit. And as a teacher, you have to be complicit, right? Because that's your job. So there's certain things like the grading system that you just have to do. Otherwise you don't have a job. Um, and so I think that's where I really struggled was yes, I can do all these little things, and big things too sometimes, right? That are going to help in the long term for my students model, myself taking care of myself for them so they see that. Every day I would ask them, or every Friday I would say, what are you doing for yourself this weekend? We'd go around the room and they'd share one thing they're doing for themselves. And, there'd just be students that be like, I'm not doing anything for myself. I'd be like, okay, like, I want you to think, we're going to come back to you. And I want you to think, what can you do? What can you try to do for yourself? Um, but it still felt, and maybe I'm hard on myself, I don't know. It still felt like it wasn't enough. And that was like, that's something I sit with and continue to sit with because I do miss being in the classroom every day. I miss my students. But I can't say that reform is enough. It's not. And I don't know what it's going to take, but it's like everything I feel like needs to be wiped. Everything needs to be wiped, and we need to start something new. In the words of Dr. Bettina Love, like dream, right? We need to dream up something new, um, because this is not it. It's and I don't want to, say that and come off as it's hopeless because it's not necessarily hopeless. Um, but to me, it's like circles, right? We're running circles. Like there's a cycle of harm, there's a cycle of trauma within the education system, and I'm trying to set out this fire, but then now there's all these other fires going around, sometimes for the same student, right? And I can't get them the resources that they need. Um, it feels impossible, and I'm sure a lot of educators, are feeling that way as well. Like it feels very impossible because it's not just the school, it's the feeling of everything that's happening outside of the school, which is the system, right? So how can I teach my kids or, make sure that they're reading at grade level, which, we find is can be very difficult. For I mean, my high schoolers, some of them were reading at a second grade reading level. And so trying to find the time to catch them up to reading, but then also, they just got evicted from their house. And so what's more important? Is it the reading? Is it, it's just it's a lot. It's a lot. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's a lot of people. Hopefully we can come together and dream up something new.
Mm. When your heart beats fast, when your throat constricts, when you start to tear up, when you're sweating, when your body is giving you these signals during conversations like this, that is, from my belief, a sign that we're on track. So don't
Mhm.
allow the sensations in the body to scare you away from what's possible or what's not. May
Mhm.
those sensations arising in the body be fuel for momentum. And by you speaking this out loud, is such a warm hug because these big ideas and massive transformation of what's possible is what lives within my heart. Like, I know I adore and thank you so much, honoring the fact that
Mhm.
you said there needs to be a complete wipeout because I'm
Mhm.
like we're raising our hand and we're like, yeah, 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 let's wipe the whole place down.
Yeah.
My mentor, Victoria Washington, mentions that sometimes when the house gets burned down, there is no rebuild, there is no starting over. You just wait and witness what God and ancestors and whatever life force moves through you after that. And may the fear be momentum. May the fear not wipe you away and turn the other cheek and say, I'm going to stay in the oppressive structure.
Mhm.
And I feel strongly that what is to come is a complete wipeout. I do. I feel it so strongly. I feel like that's one of the reasons that God brought me and so many others to this planet and why we live in the United
Mhm.
States, why we're positioned specifically in the States, why we have a strong desire to support youth, why we are in educational systems and then all of a sudden pulled away, why there's always this gravitational pull to be back towards
Mhm.
them.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm so excited. I am so excited. And maybe that's because of the privileges I do have. And maybe that's because of the lifestyle that I'm living now, in which that I'm able to dream big. And maybe
Mhm.
that, and maybe that's causing harm. And also maybe that's causing a future that is unbelievably supportive and safe for individuals to learn what it feels like to be safe in their body.
Yeah.
To bounce back a few breaths to what you mentioned about having high schoolers at second grade reading level, but then they're evicted
Mhm.
from their home. What do we focus on? I wholeheartedly believe that the main focus for a human is to be safe in their body, and anything beyond
Mhm.
that is not
Mhm.
priority, period.
Mhm. Mhm.
And may we get off the pedestal. And may individuals who have the power be brave enough to loosen their grip and allow a
Mhm.
child to know what it feels safe in the body, to know what it
Mhm.
feels like. And then,
Mhm.
therefore, to allow the adult to know what it feels like to be safe in the body.
Mhm.
And may the anger and the frustration and the pure rage moving through be a power source for individuals to come together and dream, as you say. So I
Mhm.
would love to know, what is a dream in
Mhm.
your heart and your mind? And may you speaking it right now be an addition, a color painted within the vision of what is to come. So what's the
Mhm.
dream for you?
Well, I mean, the dream, I guess a lot of it, community is so rooted in community and um I had to leave education this second time, because so many of my students were being excluded or expelled, um, and the dream is that no student ever has to feel that way, to be excluded. And so right now, the place that I'm sitting in, working at a university, I'm, in this place in between. I just want to eventually create, like a community resource center, and that's kind of how I envision schools. Um, I envision a space that's so rooted in community, rooted in family, that has so many different resources and, offerings, opportunities. Right now I'm in college access, so I'm going to schools and supporting high school students with the next steps post-secondary education. Um, and I'm seeing now, as an ESL teacher as well. And so just spaces where community can come and be together to learn from each other. I envision, I guess what I want for my PhD to continue studying is this intersection of healing, um, ancestral healing, right? Our ancestral practices and learning and knowledge, and how are those fused together? Because I think for me, that's where I found my healing was, learning about, so teaching ethnic studies. I had to teach about my indigenous culture and my Mexican culture and heritage and ancestry. And there was a lot of things that I didn't know myself. And so I was like, wow, I'm learning this, like, you know, um, to be able to teach it. And so it was so healing for me. And there's, yeah, like the quote of no history, no self. So it's no history, so N-O, no history, N-O, self. And then the other side of it is no history, K-N-O-W, no self. And so that is, for me, that's the dream, is that all of us, regardless of our ethnic identity, is we know our history, because I think so much of the trauma, the pain, that we're all experiencing collectively, individually, is because of that disconnection from our history and understanding, where we come from. And oftentimes, right, we have, people that, were purposely, violently taken away from their history, their culture, their ancestry, and how traumatizing that is. And we see it, with so many of our community members, but also for white folks, same thing that I don't think talk about enough, is that even the term white is, white folks have ethnic identities as well, and maybe they're oftentimes, many are disconnected, from their ethnic history and their ancestry. And so if we all can tap into who we are, right, we know our history, we'll know ourselves. And I think once we know that, then we can show up in our classrooms, because we feel, as you said, like that embodied somatic experience. You're back in your body, right? Because you feel that connection. You're not alone, because you have ancestors from generations and generations standing behind you, beside you. Um, and so I think, yeah, that's the dream for me, is that we all have access to know our history, to know our ancestry, right? To recognize the harm that our ancestors have caused, but also recognize the achievements. And so how can we continue to grow in that journey, with our ancestors, but then also for our futures, and then also recognizing that we, as in humanity, that we are all connected. There is There is no disconnection. We are all connected. And so your struggle is my struggle. And to me, that would be the dream is like my neighbor is struggling. I'm going to be there and support my neighbor. I don't care what our differences are. You know, that's just how we show up as humans. And I wish that was, the norm across the board is it's not just about me and my own family and myself. It's about me and my community. And I want all of my people in my community to thrive. And so I think if we could get to a place of that, there would be so much healing, right? There would be so much more shared resources. Um, yeah, it's deep. It's so, so deep. And I want to continue learning. I want to continue growing, figuring out a way of how we can, make this possible. But I truly, truly believe in ethnic studies so much because of that, because I've seen my own healing. I've seen my students like teaching ethnic studies, teaching students about their ancestry, and then watching them like it was like if there's a video or if we're reading a poem and they're just like, my ancestors did that. They achieved that, and I just sobbing. Like I would just be sobbing. My students would be sobbing. And it just, and, was so healing of like, if my ancestors did that, what are the possibilities of what I can do? I can dream. I can keep dreaming. And so I want that for everybody, to have that same experience of connecting back with the depth of who they are, right? Where am I rooted? Because from there, right, you can do so much because you know who you are. You stand in who you are. Um, yeah, and I know that, it's everybody. It's not just one community. All of us in many ways and different ways, right, are disconnected from the depths of who we are because of colonization and knowing that history is so important to understand that. And I think sometimes, being biracial, it's beautiful for me, right? Because I see it as a bridge. I'm white and I'm Mexican, and so I can see like both sides of the harm, and everybody is hurt. Everybody is hurting. And I think that's why people do act the way that they do towards, different groups of people. It's because they're hurting and they're disconnected from honestly themselves and who they truly are. They've lost their language. I talk to my mom about her German roots, and when they immigrated here, which was a very long time ago, they felt they had to completely stop speaking German because of, you know, the, um, because of the Holocaust. And so they disconnected from their culture completely. And so, again, when you lose your sense of identity, your culture, you lose yourself. And so I feel like for many of us, especially in the US, right, we're in this melting pot. We, pride ourselves on that, but really we've lost our sense of self by trying to be American or be whatever, however people define it. And so, yeah, just getting back to the root of who we are, and it's okay to be different. It's okay to, yeah, to lean on your ancestors and different languages. Yeah, that would be the dream.
And how accessible that dream is. Something that I ponder often is within the conversation of education reform. There's, you see it throughout the country of how there's these bubbles of schools that are not accessible to all, but are like really special, child-led, nature-focused schools. And not everyone can attend those schools. The majority are in a public setting or even a different setting that is still just as oppressive. And when you speak of your dream of community-based schools and or community-based centers where
Mm,
individuals are able to come back to themselves and get really curious about their own ancestral path and get really curious about the wisdom that lives in their body, and then stack the learnings of what they're passionate about on top of the wisdom that already lives with them.
mm,
That's beautiful and that's really obtainable. That is
mhm,
possible. That is so easy to do. There doesn't need to be these massive restructuring of curriculum. There doesn't need to be a massive restructuring of standardized testing.
mhm,
What it sounds like would be really supportive for the creation of these community centers is for individuals to come together who are passionate and then just start experimenting. And something I really love in my own life is there are no mistakes, there are no failures.
mhm,
We are experimenting. And as my dear sister Charmaine, who is on the first season, taught me, is that we make choices, we get feedback. We make choices, we get feedback. So to have these community centers is we make a choice, community center begins, and then get that feedback. And then we see what evolves. And to go back also is Brother Keone, who lives in Hawaii. He is native to the Hawaiian lands, and he speaks about the four corrections for humanity. And the first correction is love the body. And the first
mhm,
correction is love the body, but not just loving your body, but love all other bodies. And this
mhm,
really speaks strongly to the neighbor, what you speak
mhm,
of. And I know my individual journey very much for the past few months has been deeply rooted in loving my body and how powerful it is for me to come to terms with the fact that I don't love everybody else's bodies. I don't.
mhm,
There's still a lot of judgment. There's
mhm,
still a lot of bitterness. There's still a lot of jealousy. I just talked to a dear friend of mine. We went to Acadia camping, and I straight up said, like, my number one emotion that's out of balance within me is jealousy. And to simply
mhm,
name that, there is no
mhm,
wrong in that. I'm a human. I am learning, period. When these community centers open, and Selena, I would invite you to really play with the terms of instead of, if they happen, it's more of when they happen.
mhm,
Truly, because they
mhm,
are going to happen, because you spoke it here. That
mhm,
dream is now alive. And what if we live our life in the way of acknowledging the power of the words that we speak and not to allow it to be just wishy-washy? Because that's
mhm,
what we've been taught.
mhm,
We've been taught that like these words don't matter and to follow the system and to make the family proud and to get the house, get the job, get the degrees. And I have a whole lot to say about degrees. I do. And I respect your path and the PhD. And I go back and forth about getting my master's and back and forth about like going towards the path of the doctorate. But when it really drops down into my body, it's like, no, Renee, we will not do that path because I
mhm,
refuse to be part of a system that I deeply disagree with. Same
mhm,
dealio about, I studied education in the state of Massachusetts. The state of Massachusetts is known to be the top of the whole country for
mhm,
education. And when we speak of the MTELs, I only have one MTEL left to complete my educational degree, just one. And I really honor the path of completion. I think it's necessary for completion, and Brother Keone taught me that as well. And I relate to that. But there's something deep within me that's like, Renee, honey, don't do it. Don't complete your educational certification. Because when you do, you're going against everything that you believe in, which is a wipeout of the entire system. And not to be scared of that, to really, like,
mhm,
really wholeheartedly believe in it.
mhm.
Wow, I'm so stoked for your dream. I'm so,
Thank
so
you.
excited for your vision. I really am. It's the first expression of what is possible that I've heard so far throughout my path of being like, yeah, yeah, I can see that. Because then we can also incorporate like apprentices. And I know Brother Keone speaks of
Mhm,
that as well as like, where did apprenticeships go?
mhm,
You know? Like the hands-on learning and learning from our
mhm.
elders. There's power in that.
Hmm.
There is. And
Yeah. And there are spaces where it's already happening. And I think that's what I want. I would love to find more, find more about because it is happening. It already is happening. And so just how can we elevate those communities that are already doing the work because they're there.
thank you for sharing that and speaking that
Hmm.
forward too as well. And yeah, to take responsibility of looking into that and researching too.
Hmm.
Is there anything else on your heart that is coming forward that you'd like to speak on?
Um, I guess the only thing is just to, invite others and invite folks to learn their history and connect with the wisdom that's already within you so that you can, um, share it with the world. Yeah.
Mm. Summarizing all that has been shared today, what is the main core shift that you feel is imperative when it comes to going where we are now to going to where your dream is beyond the exploration of your heritage, unless that is that?
Can you share that one more
For
time?
sure. What do you feel is the main core shift
Mm.
needed?
Mm, ethnic studies movement. We need to get behind the ethnic studies movement.
I didn't know it was a
Yeah.
movement.
It is. So it's ethnic studies is mandated in California now. So it is,
Oh.
and obviously that can, we can go into depth about that too, right? About something that's mandated. And so somebody having the control and the power over what that curriculum will look like. But I would like to see, yeah, folks get behind that movement of having ethnic studies in our schools because it is a fight. It's the fight for ethnic studies right now across the entire United States, where folks are pushing back against people knowing their own history and connecting to their ancestors. So like for example, African American. So now AP African American Studies is there, and I think this year is the first year that it's actually rolling out, not just a pilot, right? So that one was there was so much fight against it, right? To not have it in our schools, and so that's we need to be aware of that, right? Is whose histories who's allowed to know their history and who's not allowed to know their history and why. So being critical um, of that and whose history is taught in school and not taught in school and why. Why is it kept from us? So yeah, getting behind ethnic studies.
Mm. And to explore this just a bit more before closing out is we've spoken a lot about the system and we've spoken a lot about education in the school settings. And it sounds like this ethnic studies movement can go into the home. So any families that are tuning into this
Mm-hmm.
conversation, may you remember that it's not the power of the
Mm-hmm.
educator, it's the power of
Mm-hmm.
you at home. And if you don't know your own ancestral path of how you came to where you are now,
Yeah.
may you get curious about it. And maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
incorporating your child in that journey as well, or
Mm-hmm.
sharing your passion, or asking your child where they think they came from and starting there.
Right. And I think it can be difficult. So it's that and can be difficult because oftentimes, so like for example, my father's Chicano, Mexican American, and my grandparents were very rooted in their culture, very rooted in their language. But as soon as my dad went to school, he became ashamed, right? He didn't want to speak the language. He was put into special education classes because he spoke Spanish. So he didn't teach me Spanish because of that shame that he carried, that it was a problem, right? To be different. And so that's also where the healing has to happen too, is in the schools, because when the schools don't validate it, students start becoming ashamed of who they are and their families. I've seen so many families, their parents will speak to them in Spanish, students will speak back in English. They'll understand, but they will stop speaking Spanish because they're made fun of at school. Obviously, in California, it's a little different, right? But other places of the country where Spanish is not as prevalent, That's what happens, or any other language for that matter. So that's why I push for it in the schools as well, because I think families do try so hard to preserve their cultural background and their heritage, but it's a fight against the system because the system wants to take it away. And where do they take it away? Where do they teach students to feel ashamed of who they are? In the schools,
Mhm.
in the curriculum. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe breathe deeply into that and like allow that to live in the body and to get
Mm-hmm.
curious on that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. I'm hesitant to share, and I'm going to anyways. I feel, I think of my Pepe and how he grew up in Canada. And then when he moved to the United States, he spoke primarily French, and he went to the schools with nuns, and they like literally beat him for speaking French. And
Mm-hmm.
he didn't teach any of his children French. And now I'm slowly learning French just because that's something that lives within me. My name is Renee Jean
Mm-hmm.
Lemieux. I'm meant to. I'm
Mm-hmm.
coded to. And
Mm-hmm.
to acknowledge that even though I may look a certain way, and even though I may not know the deep depths of my own lineage, we all begin somewhere, and to not
Mm-hmm.
take it on as like this huge journey of learning, but to
Mm-hmm.
honor the pace in which that you're able to explore
Mm-hmm.
your own path.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
for adults, it's a bit easier to push back on the system, whereas children, like the school
Right.
should be a safe space for them, and it's not. So then they're even gonna try a bit more to feel as safe as possible, which means pleasing others.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, dear one, thank you
Mhm.
so much.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank
thank you, thank
you.
you for this conversation. And may these words that have been shared really grow roots and sprout. And may the sprout not just stop at the little popping up from the dirt, but may redwoods grow in that place. And may they stand here for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years to come for all of our future
Mhm.
ancestors.
Mhm.
For all of the humans that are so excited to stay in touch with you, where can they do that?
Well, I do have a business, Nipadla Healing Space, as I shared. The word Nipadla means the space in between. Um, and so you can find me on Instagram, Nipadla Healing Space. I'm still, it's been a journey because I'm trying to figure out where do I fall. As a business is, I feel like it's so me that I don't feel it like, the disconnection of when you're like, is this a business or is this me, and how do I fuse them together? Because I feel so much of my business is just me. So yeah, so feel free to reach out there. Otherwise, yeah, my personal Instagram is Selena La Chicana. So you can find me there.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. And for all tuning in, go ahead and get curious about your own lineage and what is possible for the dream that Selena brought forward as well. Much
Thank
love,
you.
much love.